The X-ray lit up like a road map of old wounds. Dr. Martinez held it against the lightbox, her expression shifting from routine to concern as she traced the shadows with her finger. Multiple healed fractures, metacarpal bones, phalanges, each break telling a story I'd convinced myself was just bad luck. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Vera, she said, setting the film down and turning to face me, how many times have you broken fingers on your left hand? I flexed my fingers, feeling the familiar stiffness that had become normal over the years. The ache on rainy days, the way my pinky sat slightly crooked no matter how I positioned it. I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 times? I'm clumsy. Dr. Martinez pulled up a chair and sat directly across from me. Her voice was gentle but firm. These breaks show a consistent pattern. The angle of impact, the specific bones affected. This isn't clumsiness, Vera. This is deliberate trauma. The room went quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights. My stomach dropped like I was falling through space. What are you saying? I'm saying someone has been breaking your fingers intentionally, and from the healing patterns, this has been happening for years. I sat in that sterile office for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The words echoed in my head like a song I couldn't stop humming. Deliberate trauma. Pattern. Someone has been breaking your fingers. 26 years old, and I was just learning that my childhood wasn't normal. The first time it happened, I was 8. Meredith was 12, already tall and strong from gymnastics. We were fighting over the remote control when she grabbed my hand and bent my ring finger back until something snapped. The sound was like a twig breaking underfoot. Sharp. Final. Dad found me crying in the bathroom, cradling my swollen hand against my chest. What happened, sweetheart? Meredith bent my finger back and it broke. He examined my hand with the same attention he gave broken lawnmowers. Practical, unemotional. Accidents happen, Vera. Kids play rough sometimes. Let's get you to urgent care. At the hospital, the nurse asked how it happened. Dad answered before I could. The girls were playing and things got a little too rough. You know how siblings can be. The nurse smiled knowingly. Oh yes, I have 3 boys. They're always wrestling and someone ends up hurt. Meredith got a lecture about being more careful with her little sister. I got a splint and instructions to keep it dry. The finger healed crooked because I was too young to keep the splint positioned correctly, but Dad said it gave my hand character. The second time was 10 months later. We were supposed to be doing homework at the kitchen table, but Meredith kept poking me with her pencil eraser. I told her to stop. She laughed and poked harder, leaving pink marks on my arm. When I tried to grab the pencil away from her, she caught my middle finger and twisted it sideways. Another snap, another trip to urgent care, another lecture about playing more carefully. Accidents happen, Vera. Dad said on the drive home. But maybe you two should do homework in separate rooms from now on. The third time was during a family barbecue when I was 11. Uncle Dave was flipping burgers and Aunt Linda was arranging potato salad while cousins ran around the backyard with water balloons. Normal summer chaos. I was helping Mom carry plates outside when Meredith appeared beside me. Let me help, she said, reaching for the stack of ceramic plates in my hands. I've got it, I told her, pulling the plates closer to my chest. She grabbed anyway, her fingers wrapping around my wrist. Don't be selfish, Vera. When I didn't let go, she twisted my wrist sharply. My thumb bent backward with a sick popping sound. The plates crashed to the concrete patio, ceramic shards scattering across the gray stone like confetti. Oh no, Meredith gasped, immediately dropping to her knees to collect the broken pieces. Vera, are you okay? I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to grab so hard. Dad appeared at the sliding glass door, surveying the damage. Broken plates, scattered food. Me standing there, holding my throbbing thumb while Meredith played the concerned sister. What happened out here? We both grabbed the plates at the same time, Meredith explained, her voice full of regret. I was just trying to help, and we collided. Poor Vera hurt her thumb when the plates fell. I opened my mouth to correct her, to explain that she had grabbed my wrist on purpose, but Dad was already shaking his head with that familiar expression of mild annoyance. Accidents happen, girls, but now we need to clean this up and get Vera to the doctor again. The word again hung in the air like an accusation, like I was somehow responsible for the pattern of injuries that seemed to follow me around. At the emergency room, the triage nurse looked at my file on her computer screen. Back again, I see. What happened this time? The girls were carrying plates together and had a little collision. You know how kids can be. Always moving too fast. The nurse nodded sympathetically while typing notes into her system. Well, let's get that thumb looked at. As we waited in the examination room, Dad sat in the plastic chair, reading a magazine about fishing, while I swung my legs from the medical table. The silence stretched between us until finally he looked up. Vera, maybe you need to be more careful around your sister. Meredith is bigger and stronger than you. Sometimes she doesn't realize her own strength. I stared at him, confusion swirling in my chest. But she grabbed me on purpose. I'm sure she didn't mean to hurt you. She was just trying to help with the plates. But that's not what happened. Dad closed the magazine and leaned forward, his expression patient but firm. Sweetheart, sometimes when we're hurt and upset, we remember things differently than they actually happened. Your sister loves you. She would never hurt you on purpose. The doctor came in before I could respond, but Dad's words lodged themselves in my head like splinters. Maybe I was remembering wrong. Maybe Meredith really was just trying to help and accidents kept happening. Maybe I was the problem. The fourth incident occurred during my freshman year in high school. Meredith was home from college for winter break, and the house felt different with her back. Smaller, more tense. She had changed during her first semester away, developed new opinions about everything from politics to proper table manners. She criticized the way Mom loaded the dishwasher and rolled her eyes when Dad told his usual dad jokes. I was in my bedroom working on a history essay about World War II when she knocked on my door. Can I come in? I want to see what you're working on. I looked up from my laptop, surprised. Meredith rarely showed interest in my schoolwork. Just a paper about the Holocaust. She settled onto my bed, reading over my shoulder as I typed. Her presence made me nervous, but I tried to focus on describing the liberation of Bergen-Belsen. That's not right, she said suddenly, pointing at a paragraph about survivor testimonies. What's not right? The way you're describing it, you're being too emotional. History should be objective. I frowned at the screen, rereading what I had written. But these are actual quotes from survivors. I'm supposed to include primary sources. You're editorializing, making it sound more dramatic than it was. Heat rose in my cheeks. More dramatic? Meredith, 6 million people died. See? There you go again, getting all emotional about it. Something in her tone made my hands clench into fists. I'm not being emotional. I'm being human. Whatever. Your paper, your grade. She started to get up from the bed, but I couldn't let it go. The dismissive way she had talked about genocide, like it was just another homework assignment to get through. Wait, I said, turning in my chair to face her. Do you really think I'm wrong to care about what happened to those people? Meredith stopped halfway to the door and turned back with a look I recognized, but had never quite understood before. Cold calculation behind her eyes, like she was measuring something. I think you care too much about things that don't affect you. Basic human empathy affects everyone. Does it? She moved closer to my desk, her expression shifting to something that looked like concern, but felt like a threat. Or do you just like feeling superior to everyone else? That's not what this is about. Isn't it? Poor, sensitive Vera, feeling so much more deeply than the rest of us. My chest tightened with frustration. Why are you being like this? Like what? Mean! She laughed, but there was nothing funny about the sound. I'm not being mean, Vera. I'm being honest. You've always been dramatic. I have not. Really? Remember when you claimed I broke your fingers on purpose? You were so convinced that I was some kind of monster who hurt you for fun. My stomach dropped. I had almost forgotten about those conversations with Dad, the way he had gently corrected my memories until I doubted them myself. You did break my fingers. Accidentally. Every single time was an accident, but you turned it into this whole narrative about me being abusive. But you grabbed my wrist at the barbecue. I reached for the plates at the same time you did. We collided. That's what accidents are, Vera. She moved closer to my desk, and suddenly I felt very small in my chair, like I was 8 years old again, trying to explain something that adults wouldn't believe. Even if that's true, I said quietly, it happened a lot. Because you were always putting yourself in situations where you could get hurt. Remember the remote control? You were pulling on it while I was trying to change the channel. Of course someone was going to get hurt. My memory of that day felt fuzzy now, like trying to see through water. Had I been pulling on the remote? I remember fighting over it, but the details seemed to shift depending on how I looked at them. I guess, I said finally. What do you guess? Maybe I do remember things wrong sometimes. Meredith smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. We all do. Memory is unreliable. That's why eyewitness testimony is so problematic in court cases. She was studying psychology in college, and I felt stupid for not knowing about eyewitness testimony and memory problems. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had built up a story in my head that wasn't based on reality. I should probably get back to my paper, I said, turning toward my laptop. Good idea. And Vera, maybe try to be a little more objective in your writing. Emotion clouds judgment. She reached over my shoulder to close my laptop, her hand brushing against mine. For just a moment, her fingers lingered over my ring finger, the one that had healed crooked from that first break. She pressed down slightly, just enough to make the joint ache. Oops, she said when I winced. Sorry, still sensitive? Before I could answer, she was gone, leaving me alone with my closed laptop and a throbbing finger that hurt for reasons I couldn't quite remember. The 5th break happened during my senior year. I was home from school with the flu, lying on the couch watching daytime television and feeling sorry for myself. Mom was at work and Dad was traveling for business, so it was just me and Meredith in the house. She was home for spring break, supposedly job hunting for after graduation, but mostly she seemed to be sleeping until noon and complaining about how boring our hometown was compared to her college city. I had dozed off during a rerun of some medical drama when I felt the couch cushions shift. Meredith sat down near my feet, holding 2 mugs of tea. Thought you might want something warm. She offered me one of the mugs. I struggled to sit up, my head still fuzzy from sleep and congestion. Thanks. That's really nice of you. The tea was perfect, sweet and hot with honey and lemon. For a moment, it felt like we were actually sisters instead of 2 people who happened to share DNA and a childhood address. Remember when we used to have tea parties in the backyard? With Mom's good china that we weren't supposed to touch? And those terrible cookies you made that one time. What did you put in them? I laughed, which triggered a coughing fit. Salt instead of sugar. I was 8 and couldn't read the labels properly. Dad ate 3 of them anyway and pretended they were delicious. He did not. He absolutely did. I watched him sneak into the kitchen afterwards and drink about a gallon of milk. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping tea and watching the medical drama's characters navigate various crises. It was nice. Normal. The kind of sisterly bonding I had always wanted but rarely experienced. Can I ask you something? Meredith said during a commercial break. Sure. Do you ever think about how different we are? I considered the question, studying her profile as she stared at the television. Different how? Just in general. Our personalities, the way we approach things. I guess you've always been more outgoing, and you've always been more sensitive. The word hung between us like smoke. Sensitive. The way she said it made it sound like a diagnosis. Is that bad? Not bad, just different. She turned to look at me directly. Sometimes I wonder if being so sensitive makes things harder for you. What do you mean? Like with your fingers. All those accidents when we were kids. My stomach tightened. We hadn't talked about the finger incidents in years, and I had assumed they were safely buried in childhood where forgotten things belonged. What about them? I just think if you hadn't been so sensitive about minor bumps and scrapes, they might not have seemed like such a big deal. I set my tea mug on the coffee table, suddenly feeling very awake. They were broken bones, Meredith, not scrapes. I know that, but kids break bones all the time. Most of them don't turn it into this whole traumatic narrative. I didn't turn it into anything. Didn't you? Her voice was gentle, concerned, the tone someone might use to talk to a confused elderly person. You convinced yourself that I was hurting you on purpose. You told Dad I was abusing you. Because you were! The words came out before I could stop them, automatic and certain. But as soon as I said them, doubt crept in. Had I convinced myself of something that wasn't true? Was I really so sensitive that normal sibling roughness had felt like abuse? Vera, Meredith said softly, reaching over to touch my hand, I would never hurt you on purpose. You're my little sister. I love you. Her fingers wrapped around my wrist, the same way they had during the barbecue incident. But this time her grip was gentle, comforting. Maybe it had been gentle before too, and I had misremembered. I know you love me, I said, though the words felt strange in my mouth. Do you? Because sometimes I feel like you see me as this monster who goes around hurting people for fun. I don't think you're a monster. But you do think I hurt you on purpose. I stared down at our joined hands, her fingers pale against my wrist. I thought you did, but maybe I was wrong. Memory is tricky, she said, echoing what she had told me during high school, especially childhood memories. They get mixed up with emotions and fears. Yeah, maybe. The thing is, I worry about you. This pattern of seeing malice where there's only accident, it's not healthy, Vera. Her grip on my wrist tightened slightly. Not enough to hurt, just enough to make me aware of the pressure. What pattern? You did it with Mrs. Henderson in 3rd grade, remember? You were convinced she was picking on you, but she was just trying to help you improve your handwriting. I did remember Mrs. Henderson, though not the way Meredith was describing. The teacher had made me rewrite assignments over and over, sometimes keeping me inside for recess to practice letter formation while other kids played outside. And in middle school with Coach Rivera, you thought he was singling you out during gym class? Coach Rivera had made me run extra laps when I couldn't climb the rope, told me I needed to toughen up when I complained about being picked last for teams. See the pattern? Meredith's voice was still gentle, but her fingers were pressing more firmly into my wrist. You interpret normal challenges as personal attacks. Maybe you're right. I know I'm right. And I'm worried that if you don't live to see things more clearly, you're going to spend your whole life feeling like a victim. She was still holding my wrist, her thumb now resting directly over the pulse point. I could feel my heartbeat against her finger, rapid and unsteady. I don't want to be a victim. Good! That's the first step. Without warning, she bent my index finger backward. Not far enough to break it, but enough to send a sharp spike of pain up my arm. I gasped and tried to pull away, but her grip was firm. See? She said, maintaining the painful angle of my finger. This is what I mean. Right now, you're thinking I'm hurting you on purpose. But really, I'm just trying to show you how easy it is to misinterpret normal physical contact. The pain was making my eyes water, but her voice remained calm and reasonable, like a teacher explaining a difficult concept. Meredith, that hurts. Of course it hurts. Finger joints aren't supposed to bend that way. But does it hurt because I'm trying to harm you, or because I'm trying to teach you something important? I don't know how to answer. The pain felt intentional, but her explanation made a twisted kind of sense. I don't know. Exactly. You don't know. And that's uncertainty is what's been causing you problems your whole life. She bent my finger a little further. The joint made a small popping sound and fresh pain bloomed across my knuckles. Meredith, please. Please what? Please let go. Why? Because you think I'm hurting you?
Because you are hurting me, or because you're too sensitive to handle normal sibling interaction. The distinction felt important somehow, though I couldn't understand why. All I knew was that my finger felt like it was on fire and I wanted her to stop. I don't know the difference. That's the problem, Vera.
You never have. She released my finger so suddenly that I fell backward into the couch cushions. My index finger throbbed and refused to straighten properly, but it wasn't broken, just sprained. Just hurt enough to remind me of the conversation for days afterward. "Are you okay?" Meredith asked, her voice full of concern. I flexed my finger experimentally, trying to gauge the damage. "I think so." "Good. I'm sorry if that was too intense, but sometimes the only way to learn is through experience." She gathered up our empty tea mugs and headed toward the kitchen, leaving me alone on the couch with my aching finger and a head full of questions I didn't know how to ask. That night at dinner, Dad asked how I was feeling. "Better," I said, though my finger was still swollen and tender. "Good. Your sister said you two had a nice afternoon together." I glanced at Meredith, who was cutting her chicken with deliberate precision. "Yeah, we talked about stuff." "It's nice when you girls get along," Mom added. "You're so different, but that's what makes your relationship special." Meredith smiled at me across the table. "Vera and I understand each other perfectly, don't we, little sister?" I nodded and kept eating, though the food tasted like cardboard. My finger ached every time I gripped my fork, but I didn't mention it. Accidents happen, after all, and maybe this had been an accident too, despite how intentional it had felt. Maybe I really was too sensitive to tell the difference. After that, I stopped thinking about the finger incidents as a pattern. They became what Meredith said they were: accidents, misunderstandings, evidence of my own tendency to see malice where none existed. I went to college and studied literature, drawn to stories about people who overcame difficult circumstances through strength and determination. I dated a few guys, but never seriously, always finding reasons why relationships wouldn't work. Too different, too similar, wrong timing, bad communication. I moved to a small city 2 hours from home and got a job at a nonprofit that helped low-income families navigate social services. The work felt meaningful, like I was finally using my sensitivity for something productive instead of manufacturing problems where none existed. Meredith got married during my second year of college to a man named Trevor who sold insurance and played golf on weekends. They had a big wedding with white roses and a reception at the country club. I was a bridesmaid and gave a speech about how lucky Trevor was to marry someone as wonderful as my sister. The words felt hollow in my mouth, but everyone applauded and Meredith hugged me afterward, whispering, "Thank you for understanding," in my ear. I didn't visit home very often after college. Work kept me busy and the distance felt comfortable, safe. When I did go back for holidays or birthdays, Meredith and I maintained a polite relationship built on surface-level conversations and shared memories that we both remembered differently. She had 2 children, both boys, and seemed to love motherhood in the same intense way she had approached everything else. Her social media was full of pictures of family adventures and inspirational quotes about the blessing of being chosen to raise strong men. I followed her updates, but rarely commented. We texted occasionally about logistical things like Dad's birthday or Mom's anniversary, but we never talked about anything deeper than scheduling and gift suggestions. It was a manageable relationship. Distant, but functional. I told myself I was happy with it. Then came the arthritis. I was 25 when I first noticed the stiffness in my left hand. Mornings were the worst, my fingers reluctant to bend and clumsy around coffee cups and door handles. I assumed it was from typing too much at work or sleeping on my hand wrong, but the stiffness got worse instead of better. My ring finger, the one that had healed crooked from that first break, began to ache constantly.
The weather seemed to affect it, pain flaring before rainstorms like some kind of biological barometer. After 6 months of hoping it would resolve on its own, I finally made an appointment with my doctor. Dr. Patel examined my hands with professional thoroughness, asking about family history and previous injuries. Have you ever broken any bones in this hand? A few fingers when I was a kid. Accidents. She moved my joints carefully, testing range of motion and noting where I winced. Multiple fractures can sometimes lead to early arthritis, especially if they didn't heal properly. Is that what this is? Possibly. I'd like to send you to a hand specialist for a more detailed evaluation, and we'll need x-rays to see what's going on with the bone structure. Dr. Martinez was the hand specialist, a woman in her 50s with gentle eyes and a no-nonsense manner. Her office walls were covered with anatomical charts showing the intricate architecture of human hands, all those delicate bones and tendons working together to create one of evolution's most sophisticated tools. The x-rays were scheduled for the following week. I spent the intervening days researching arthritis treatments and wondering if this was what getting older felt like. My hand hurt more when I thought about it, which seemed to prove Meredith's old point about my tendency toward drama. The morning of the x-ray appointment, I almost canceled. The pain had lessened overnight, and I convinced myself I was overreacting to normal wear and tear. But something made me keep the appointment anyway. Maybe curiosity, maybe the memory of all those childhood trips to urgent care. The radiology technician positioned my hand on the machine carefully, adjusting angles to capture different views of the bone structure. The process was quick and painless, though the weight of the lead apron made me feel like I was being prepared for something more serious than joint imaging. Results should be ready by this afternoon, the technician said. Dr. Martinez will call you once she's had a chance to review everything. I went back to work and tried to focus on client files, but my attention kept drifting to my left hand, the fingers that had been broken and healed and broken again, the crooked pinky that Dad said gave my hand character, the ring finger that never quite straightened properly. Dr. Martinez called at 3:30. Vera, I'd like you to come in tomorrow morning to discuss your x-ray results. There are some things I want to go over with you in person. Is it arthritis? We'll talk about everything tomorrow. Can you be here at 9? The careful neutrality in her voice made my stomach drop. Doctors only insisted on in-person appointments when the news was too complicated for phone calls. That night, I lay awake staring at my left hand in the moonlight streaming through my bedroom window. 5 fingers that had been broken a total of 7 times during my childhood. Accidents, Meredith had always said. Normal sibling roughness that I had misinterpreted through my oversensitive lens. But lying there in the dark, I remembered decals I had pushed aside. The look in Meredith's eyes before she grabbed my wrist at the barbecue. The way she had positioned herself between me and Dad after the remote control incident, controlling the narrative before I could speak. The calculated way she had bent my finger during that afternoon with the tea, using pain as a teaching tool. Maybe Dr. Martinez would confirm what I had always suspected but never been allowed to believe. Maybe the pattern was real, after all. Or maybe I was still being too sensitive to see malice where none existed. Either way, I would know tomorrow. I finally fell asleep with my left hand tucked under my pillow, protecting it from dreams I couldn't control. Part 2, The Truth Unveiled. The next morning felt like walking to my own execution. I arrived at Dr. Martinez's office 15 minutes early and spent the time studying her diplomas on the wall. Medical school, residency, board certifications in hand surgery and orthopedic trauma, credentials that meant she knew what she was talking about when she looked at broken bones.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She appeared in the doorway with my file in her hands. Come on back. Her office was smaller than the examination room, crowded with medical journals and anatomical models. She gestured for me to sit in the chair across from her desk while she arranged my x-rays on the light box. I want to show you something, she said, pointing to the first image. These are the fractures in your ring finger from childhood. See how the bone healed here? And here? The breaks looked like fault lines in the ghostly white bones, imperfect mends that would never be quite right again. Now look at this one. She moved to the next X-ray. Your middle finger, same pattern of healing. And your thumb. Image after image, the same story told in calcium and scar tissue. Bones that had been broken and mended and broken again. What I'm seeing, Dr. Martinez continued, is not random childhood accidents. These fractures show consistent force applied at specific angles, the kind of trauma that happens when someone grabs a hand and deliberately hyperextends the joints. My throat felt tight. Are you sure? I've been doing this for 20 years, Vera. I've seen every kind of hand injury you can imagine. Sports injuries, car accidents, work-related trauma. This pattern is distinctive. She pulled out a different set of images, comparison X-rays from medical textbooks. This is what accidental finger fractures typically look like. Notice the random nature of the breaks, the varying angles? Now compare that to yours. The difference was stark. My injuries formed a pattern as clear as handwriting. Someone was hurting you systematically, Dr. Martinez said gently. And from the age of the healed fractures, it started when you were very young. The room felt like it was tilting. 20 years of being told I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too quick to see malice where none existed. 20 years of doubting my own memories and apologizing for reactions that were completely reasonable. My sister, I said quietly. Can you tell me what happened? So I did. Starting with the remote control when I was 8 and moving through each incident, including details I had convinced myself were imagined or misremembered. Dr. Martinez listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes, but mostly just watching my face as I talked. The gaslighting was almost as damaging as the physical abuse, she said when I finished, making you doubt your own perceptions. That's a classic pattern in abusive relationships. But we were just kids. Age doesn't negate intent, Vera, and from what you're describing, this behavior continued into your teenage years. That's not normal sibling rivalry. I stared at my hands, those familiar fingers that held so much hidden history. What do I do with this information? That's up to you. But first, I think you should understand the full extent of the damage. She showed me the current X-rays, pointing out areas where arthritis was already developing in the previously broken joints. The irregular healing had created rough surfaces that would continue to deteriorate over time. You're looking at chronic pain and reduced mobility as you age. These injuries will affect you for the rest of your life. The weight of that statement settled over me like a heavy blanket. Not just the childhood trauma, but decades of consequences still to come. My sister's actions had reached into my future and stolen pieces of it. Is there treatment? Physical therapy can help maintain mobility, anti-inflammatory medications for the pain. Eventually, you might need surgical intervention to clean up some of these joints. She handed me a stack of referrals and educational materials about post-traumatic arthritis. But Vera, I want you to understand something important. This wasn't your fault. Children don't cause their own abuse by being too sensitive or dramatic. You were hurt by someone who should have protected you. I left the doctor's office with medical validation of what I had always known, but been taught to doubt. The drive home was a blur of traffic lights and half-formed thoughts. When I finally made it to my apartment, I sat on my couch and called in sick to work. I needed time to process what Dr. Martinez had told me. More than that, I needed to decide what to do about it. The first person I thought of calling was my mother. Surely she would want to know that her daughter had been systematically abused for years while she and Dad dismissed it as accidents. Surely she would be horrified to learn the truth. But as I held the phone, doubt crept in. How many times had I tried to explain what Meredith was doing? How many times had I been told I was being too sensitive, too dramatic, too quick to assume the worst? Instead of calling,
I spent the afternoon researching childhood abuse and sibling violence. The statistics were staggering. 1 in 4 children experienced severe physical abuse from a sibling, but it was rarely reported or taken seriously by adults. Parents often dismissed sibling abuse as normal rivalry, especially when the victim was sensitive or the abuser was charming. I found support forums full of stories that sounded like my own. Adults discovering in therapy or through medical examinations that their childhood accidents had actually been systematic abuse. The common threads were gaslighting, family denial, and victims who spent years questioning their own memories. One post hit very close to home. My brother broke my arm twice and gave me a concussion, but my parents always said boys will be boys. It took a neurologist finding evidence of old brain trauma for anyone to believe me. By then, I was 35 and I had spent my whole adult life thinking I was crazy. I wasn't crazy. The X-rays proved it. Dr. Martinez had confirmed it. My memories were accurate, even when everyone else had insisted they were distorted by oversensitivity. That evening, I drafted a text message to Meredith. I wrote and deleted it dozens of times, trying to find words that would convey the magnitude of what I had discovered without sounding accusatory or dramatic. Hi, Meredith. I went to a hand specialist today about the arthritis in my fingers. The doctor said my old fractures show a pattern of deliberate trauma, not accidents. We need to talk. I stared at the message for an hour before finally sending it. Her response came within minutes. Vera, that's ridiculous. We were kids. Kids have accidents. Are you really going to let some doctor convince you that I was abusing you? The dismissive tone was so familiar it made my chest ache. Even confronted with medical evidence, she was still gaslighting me. I typed back, it's not what the doctor convinced me of. It's what the X-rays show. Multiple, deliberate fractures over several years. X-rays can't show intent. They can only show broken bones. You're reading way too much into this. I remember what happened, Meredith. I remember you grabbing my wrist at the barbecue and twisting it until my thumb broke. I remember you bending my finger backward on purpose when we were teenagers. Those are false memories. You've always had an overactive imagination. Medical evidence isn't imagination.
Medical evidence of broken bones, not evidence of abuse. There's a difference. I set the phone down and walked away from the conversation. There was no point in continuing. Meredith would never admit what she had done, and I would never convince her that my memories were real. But I didn't need her admission anymore. I had proof. The next morning, I called my parents' house. Dad answered on the third ring, his voice cheerful and familiar. Vera, how are you, sweetheart? We haven't heard from you in weeks. Hi, Dad. I'm calling because I need to tell you something important. What's wrong? You sound serious. I took a deep breath and launched into the same explanation I had given Dr. Martinez. The hand specialist, the X-rays, the pattern of deliberate trauma. Dad listened in silence, occasionally making small sounds, but not interrupting. Well, he said when I finished, that's quite a story. It's not a story, Dad. It's what happened. Vera, honey, I think you might be misinterpreting what this doctor told you. The familiar phrase hit me like a slap. Misinterpreting. The same word he had used when I was 8 years old, trying to explain that Meredith had hurt me on purpose. She was very clear about what the X-rays showed. Doctors see what they're trained to see. When you tell them about sibling conflicts, they start looking for abuse patterns. I didn't tell her about sibling conflicts. I told her about systematic physical abuse, which you interpreted from normal childhood accidents. Dad, listen to me. Meredith broke my fingers on purpose, multiple times. The medical evidence proves it. The medical evidence proves that you broke your fingers multiple times. It doesn't prove intent. I closed my eyes, feeling 8 years old again. Do you remember what you used to say when I got hurt? We always took you to the doctor right away. You used to say, accidents happen. Every single time. Because they do happen. Kids play rough and sometimes people get hurt. 7 broken fingers over 6 years isn't rough play, Dad. It's abuse. Vera, I think you need to be very careful about throwing around accusations like that. Meredith loves you.
She's always loved you. Love doesn't break people's bones. She was a child too, sweetheart. Children don't have the same self-control as adults. She was still doing it when she was in college, when I was in high school. What incident are you referring to? I told him about the afternoon with the tea, the way Meredith had bent my finger backward while explaining how my sensitivity distorted my perceptions. That doesn't sound like abuse, Dad said. That sounds like a sister trying to help you understand something important about yourself. By causing me pain? By showing you how your reactions might be disproportionate to the actual stimulus. The words were so similar to what Meredith had said that day that I wondered if they had discussed her teaching methods, if Dad had known what was happening and approved of it. Did you know she was still hurting me in high school? I knew she was concerned about your tendency to over-dramatize situations. So you knew. I knew she was trying to help you develop better coping mechanisms. My vision blurred with sudden tears. Better coping mechanisms for being abused by my sister? Better coping mechanisms for normal life challenges that you were interpreting as personal attacks. Dad, please, just listen to what I'm saying. Your daughter was systematically hurting your other daughter for years, and you helped her cover it up. That's not what happened, Vera. Then what did happen? You were a very sensitive child who had trouble distinguishing between accidental contact and intentional harm. Meredith tried to help you learn that distinction, and we supported her efforts. By letting her break my fingers? By letting her teach you that not every bump or scrape was a catastrophe. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen staring at my hands. The same hands that had been broken and dismissed and gaslit into non-existence. But they were real. The breaks were real. The pattern was real, even if my family would never admit it. That afternoon, I called Dr. Martinez's office and asked for copies of my x-rays and her written report. If my family wouldn't believe medical evidence, at least I would have documentation of the truth. The receptionist said the records would be ready by the end of the week. As I hung up, I realized I was creating a paper trail, evidence of what had been done to me preserved in medical files that couldn't be gaslit or dismissed as oversensitivity. For the first time in my life, I had proof that my memories were accurate. It felt like finally being able to breathe after holding my breath for 20 years. Part 3. Breaking Free. The family dinner invitation came 3 days later, delivered through my mother's carefully neutral text message. Meredith had told us you've been having some health concerns. Why don't you come to dinner Sunday so we can all talk together? Nothing accusatory, just family supporting family. I stared at the message for a long time, recognizing the manipulation techniques I had learned to identify through my afternoon of research, minimizing the situation by calling systematic abuse health concerns, framing my medical discovery as accusations rather than revelations, positioning themselves as the supportive family and me as the troubled member who needed help. But I also saw an opportunity, a chance to present the medical evidence to my parents in person, where they couldn't hang up or dismiss me as easily as they had on the phone. I texted back, "I'll be there at 6. Sunday arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that made my damaged joints ache with barometric pressure changes. I drove to my parents' house with a folder of medical records on the passenger seat, x-rays and doctor's notes that told the story my family had refused to hear for 20 years. The house looked exactly the same as it had during my childhood. Same beige siding, same overgrown hedges, same crooked mailbox that Dad never quite got around to fixing. I sat in the driveway for several minutes, building courage for what was about to happen. Meredith's car was already there, a gleaming SUV that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. Through the living room window, I could see figures moving around, setting the table and preparing for the performance of family unity. Mom answered the door with her brightest smile, the one she used for church functions and neighborhood gatherings. "Vera, you look thin. Are you eating enough?" "I'm fine, Mom." "Well, come in. Meredith is already here with the boys." My nephews, ages 6 and 8, were sprawled on the living room floor playing video games with the volume turned up loud enough to rattle windows. They glanced up when I entered, but quickly returned to their screens, uninterested in adult drama. "Aunt Vera," the older one, Marcus, paused his game long enough to give me a quick hug.
Mom said you might be sick. I'm not sick, buddy. Just dealing with some old injuries. Like when you broke your fingers all those times when Mom was little? The words hit the room like a lightning strike. Marcus had clearly heard family stories about my clumsiness, passed down through generations as amusing anecdotes about his accident-prone aunt. Something like that, I said carefully. Meredith appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked perfect as always. Blonde hair pulled back in a casual ponytail, minimal makeup that somehow made her look effortlessly beautiful. The kind of woman who could sell insurance or run for city council or convince people that medical evidence was just misinterpretation. Hi, Vera. Her voice was warm but cautious. I'm glad you came. We need to talk. Of course, that's why we're all here. Dad emerged from his study, still wearing his weekend uniform of polo shirt and khakis. He hugged me with the same careful affection he had shown throughout my childhood. Present but distant, loving but never quite believing me. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Like I'm finally getting some answers. That's good. Answers are important. We gathered around the dining room table, the same one where I had eaten countless childhood meals while nursing hidden injuries and learning to doubt my own perceptions. Mom had made pot roast with all the traditional sides, comfort food designed to create an atmosphere of warmth and normalcy. For the first 20 minutes, we maintained the pretense of a regular childhood dinner. Dad asked about my job, Mom fretted about my eating habits, Meredith shared updates about her children's activities. The boys finished eating quickly and returned to their video games, leaving the adults to navigate more serious conversation. So, Mom said finally, setting down her fork, Meredith told us about your doctor's appointment. What exactly did she tell you? That you went to a specialist about your hand pain and came away with some concerning ideas about your childhood. I reached for the folder that I had placed beside my chair. I brought copies of the medical records. Would you like to see what the doctor actually found? Vera, Meredith said gently, before you show us anything, I think we should talk about what's really going on here. What's really going on is that I have medical evidence of systematic abuse. What's really going on is that you've been struggling with some difficult emotions, and this doctor visit gave you a framework to reinterpret old memories. I opened the folder and pulled out the first X-ray, holding it up to the dining room light. The broken bones were visible even without a light box, fault lines in the ghostly architecture of my hand. This is what my ring finger looks like inside. See these fracture lines? According to Dr. Martinez, they show evidence of deliberate hyperextension, not accidental trauma. Dad leaned forward to examine the image. How can a doctor determine intent from a bone scan? The same way forensic specialists determine cause of death from skeletal remains. Bone fractures have distinctive patterns depending on how they occur. I pulled out more X-rays, spreading them across the table like evidence in a courtroom. 7 fractures across 5 fingers, all showing the same type of force applied at the same angles. The probability of this being accidental is essentially 0. Probability isn't certainty, Meredith said. And you're forgetting that I was present for every one of those incidents. I know what happened. So do I. And now I have medical confirmation. You have medical confirmation that you broke your fingers, not medical confirmation of how it happened. I pulled out Dr. Martinez's written report and began reading aloud. Patient presents with multiple healed fractures showing consistent pattern of deliberate hyperextension trauma. Injuries are not consistent with accidental mechanisms typically seen in childhood mishaps. Pattern suggests systematic abuse over extended period. The room went quiet, except for the video game sounds from the living room. Mom stared at the papers scattered across her dinner table. Dad studied the X-rays with the same attention he gave broken appliances, and Meredith sat back in her chair with an expression I couldn't read.
Even if that's accurate, Dad said finally, it doesn't necessarily mean Meredith was trying to hurt you. Who else would be systematically breaking my fingers? Maybe no one was systematic about it. Maybe you were just particularly prone to finger injuries. Prone to them how? Some children are more fragile than others. Some have coordination issues that make them more likely to get hurt during normal play. I looked around the table at these people who had raised me, wondering if they actually believed what they were saying or if they were just so invested in their narrative that they couldn't see any alternative. Dad, listen to yourself. You're suggesting that I was genetically predisposed to finger fractures? I'm suggesting that there might be explanations other than deliberate abuse, such as hypermobility syndrome, bone density issues, coordination disorders. Did any doctor ever diagnose me with those conditions? You never had comprehensive testing. Because you told every doctor that my injuries were accidents. You never mentioned that they followed a pattern. Because we didn't see a pattern. Mom said, speaking up for the first time since I had started presenting evidence. We saw a clumsy child who kept getting hurt during normal sibling interactions. Normal sibling interactions don't result in 7 broken fingers. They do when one child is significantly larger and stronger than the other. I was 4 years older than you, Vera. I didn't know my own strength. You knew it well enough to control exactly which joints you hyperextended. That's not how it happened. Then how did it happen? She sighed, the sound of someone being forced to explain something obvious to someone too dense to understand. You were always grabbing onto me when we played, holding my hands, pulling on my arms, trying to wrestle even though you were much smaller. When I tried to get free, sometimes your fingers got caught. Got caught how? Between my hands and whatever we were fighting over. The remote control, toys, whatever. It was a plausible explanation, delivered with the confidence of someone who had spent years perfecting it. If I hadn't been there, if I didn't have my own memories of what had actually happened, I might have believed it myself. What about the barbecue incident? We weren't fighting over anything. We were both reaching for the plates at the same time. Our hands collided. You grabbed my wrist and twisted it. I reached for the plates and accidentally caught your wrist when you pulled away. Accidentally twisted it hard enough to break my thumb? Accidents can be severe, Vera. That doesn't make them intentional. I stared at her across the table, this sister who had shared my childhood and rewritten every painful moment of it. She looked so sincere, so genuinely confused by my accusations. If I didn't know better, I would think she actually believed her own version of events. What about when we were teenagers? The afternoon with the tea when you bent my finger backward to teach me about sensitivity. I was trying to help you understand how your emotional reactions might be disproportionate to actual physical sensations. By causing me pain. By showing you that pain doesn't always indicate malice. You hurt me on purpose to prove that you weren't hurting me on purpose. I applied gentle pressure to demonstrate how easily you interpreted normal contact as aggression. Gentle pressure that sprained my finger. If it was sprained, that proves my point about your disproportionate reactions. The conversation was becoming circular. Each of my accusations met with explanations that sounded reasonable on the surface, but crumbled under scrutiny. Meredith had answers for everything. Alternative narratives that transformed deliberate abuse into accidental contact and well-meaning education. Here's what I don't understand, I said, gathering up the x-rays and putting them back in the folder.
Even if you believe that all of these incidents were accidents, why didn't anyone think it was strange that they kept happening? Why didn't anyone ask why one child was getting hurt so often? We did ask, Dad said. We asked if you were being more careful. We asked if you understood that you needed to be gentler during play. You asked me to change my behavior to prevent accidents that weren't actually accidents. We asked you to take responsibility for your own safety. I was 8 years old. 8-year-olds are capable of learning from their mistakes. What mistakes?
Getting near my sister? Being more aware of your physical limitations. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. My physical limitation was being smaller than someone who wanted to hurt me. No one wanted to hurt you, Mom said firmly. Meredith loves you. We all love you. Love doesn't break people's bones. Accidents break people's bones, Meredith said. Love recognizes when someone is struggling with reality and tries to help them find clarity. Reality is what these X-rays show. Reality is what happened, not what you've convinced yourself happened. We had reached an impasse. No amount of medical evidence would convince them that their golden daughter had systematically abused her little sister. No testimony from specialists would override their need to maintain the family mythology they had built around accidental injuries and oversensitive reactions. I want you all to understand something, I said, standing up from the table. I didn't come here to get your permission to believe my own memories. I came here to give you a chance to acknowledge what happened and maybe start rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of truth. We want to rebuild too, Mom said quickly, but not based on false accusations and misunderstood medical reports. Then we can't rebuild at all. I picked up my folder and headed toward the front door. Behind me, I could hear chair legs scraping against hardwood as they followed me. Vera, wait, Dad called. Don't leave like this. I turned back to face them in the entryway, these people who had shaped my childhood and taught me to doubt myself at every turn. I spent 20 years thinking I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too quick to see problems where none existed. I apologized for reactions that were completely reasonable. I accepted responsibility for things that weren't my fault. We never wanted you to feel that way, Mom said. But you did want me to feel that way, because it was easier than admitting that one of your daughters was hurting the other. That's not fair, Meredith said. Fair would have been protecting me when I told you what was happening. Fair would have been believing me when I said I was being hurt on purpose. You were a child with an overactive imagination. I was a child telling the truth. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The drizzle had stopped, but the air still felt heavy with moisture and unresolved tension. If you walk away now, Dad said, you're choosing to destroy this family over something that happened 20 years ago. I turned back one more time. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just refusing to pretend anymore. Pretend what? That I deserved what happened to me? That I should be grateful for the people who stood by and let it happen? That I owe you forgiveness for things you won't even admit you did wrong? Vera, Mom said, stepping forward with tears in her eyes, we're our daughter. We love you no matter what. But you love Meredith more. You always have. That's not true. It is true. And that's why you can look at medical evidence of systematic abuse and find ways to explain it away. Because admitting what she did would mean admitting that you failed to protect me. I walked to my car without looking back. As I drove away, I could see them standing on the porch in my rearview mirror, a family united in their commitment to a story that didn't include my pain. That night, I blocked all of their phone numbers. 3 weeks later, I found a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma and family dysfunction. Dr. Sarah Chen had kind eyes and a straightforward manner that reminded me of Dr. Martinez. She listened to my story without interruption, asking occasional clarifying questions, but mostly just witnessing the experiences I had carried alone for so long. It's common for families to resist acknowledging abuse, she told me during our third session, especially when the abuser is seen as the successful or favored child. Admitting what happened would force everyone to confront their role in enabling it. So, I'm not crazy for cutting contact. You're protecting yourself. That's not crazy, it's healthy. Even if they really believe their version of events, their beliefs don't negate your experiences, and frankly, willful blindness can be just as damaging as deliberate cruelty. Over the following months, I learned about trauma responses and gaslighting techniques. I practiced setting boundaries and trusting my own perceptions. I grieved the family I had wanted and began building a life around the family I deserved. The guilt was the hardest part. I had been raised to believe that family loyalty was paramount, that love meant forgiveness, that holding grudges was petty and destructive. But Dr. Chen helped me understand the difference between forgiveness and enabling, between family loyalty and self-sacrifice. You can love people and still protect yourself from them. You can forgive people without giving them access to hurt you again. 6 months after cutting contact, I received a letter from my mother. The envelope was addressed in her careful handwriting, the return address familiar, but somehow foreign now. I stared at it for several minutes before deciding to open it. "Dear Vera," it began, "we miss you terribly and hope you're doing well. We've been thinking about our last conversation and want you to know that we're open to family counseling if that would help us communicate better. We love you and want to work through whatever is keeping us apart." There was no acknowledgement of the medical evidence I had presented, no mention of systematic abuse or patterns of deliberate trauma, just an offer to improve communication, as if our estrangement was simply a misunderstanding that could be resolved through better listening skills. I showed the letter to Dr. Chen during our next appointment. "How does it make you feel?" she asked. "Sad and relieved." "Sad because?" "Because they still don't get it. They're still treating this like a communication problem instead of an abuse problem." "And relieved because?" "Because I don't have to keep hoping they'll change. This letter proves they haven't." I never responded to the letter. 3 months later, another one arrived with a similar tone and message. Then a Christmas card with a generic family photo and a note about how empty the holidays felt without me. Each communication confirmed what I already knew. They wanted me back, but only if I agreed to return to the old dynamic where my pain was dismissed and their narrative was protected. A year after cutting contact, I moved to a different city 3 states away. I found a new job with a nonprofit that helped other trauma survivors navigate legal and medical systems. The work felt meaningful in ways my previous job never had, like I was finally using my experiences to help rather than hide from them. My new apartment had big windows that let in lots of natural light. I bought plants and learned to cook elaborate meals for one. I made friends who didn't know about my family history and therefore had no investment in minimizing or explaining away my experiences. On quiet evenings, I would sit by my windows and flex my fingers, feeling the familiar ache of old injuries, but also the strength that had developed from learning to use my hands differently. Physical therapy had helped maintain mobility and reduce inflammation. The arthritis would continue to progress, but I was managing it proactively instead of pretending it didn't exist.
Sometimes I thought about Meredith's children and wondered if they were safe from her need to control and educate through pain. I had no way of knowing and no ability to intervene, even if I suspected something was wrong. That helplessness was one of the hardest parts of estrangement, knowing that my silence might enable future victims. But I also knew that I couldn't protect others at the expense of my own healing. I had spent too many years sacrificing my well-being for the comfort of people who refused to acknowledge my reality. 2 years after moving away, I received a wedding invitation from a cousin I barely knew. Inside was a handwritten note. "We hope you can make it. Haven't seen you at family gatherings lately and wondered if everything is okay." I realized that my absence had been noticed, but not understood. The family had probably been told that I was going through a difficult phase or dealing with mental health issues. My parents would have crafted an explanation that preserved their image while painting me as the troubled member who needed space to work through her problems. I didn't attend the wedding, but I did send a gift with a poet card. Maintaining complete isolation wasn't sustainable, but I could engage selectively with family members who hadn't been directly involved in my abuse or its cover-up. 3 years after cutting contact, I started dating someone seriously for the first time since college. David was a social worker who understood trauma responses and didn't push me to share more than I was comfortable revealing. When I finally told him about my family situation, he listened without trying to fix anything or suggest reconciliation strategies. "I'm proud of you for protecting yourself," he said. "That takes incredible strength." Sometimes I wonder if I'm being too harsh. Are you happy now? I considered the question seriously. Yes, more than I've ever been. Then you're not being too harsh. You're being effective. The 4th anniversary of my last family dinner passed without fanfare. I noticed the date, but didn't dwell on it. Instead, I spent the evening cooking dinner with David and laughing at terrible movies. Normal activities with someone who accepted my boundaries without question. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I caught sight of my hands in the bathroom mirror. The fingers that had been broken and gaslit and dismissed. The joints that ached on rainy days and reminded me daily of what I had survived. But they were also the hands that had typed resignation letters and packed moving boxes and signed leases on apartments where I felt safe. They had learned to cook new recipes and tend plants and hold someone who loved me without condition. My sister had tried to break more than my bones. She had tried to break my ability to trust my own perceptions, to advocate for myself, to believe that I deserved protection and care. For 20 years, she had succeeded. But bones heal stronger than they were before the break. And sometimes people do, too. I turned off the bathroom light and went to bed in my own apartment, in my own city, surrounded by my own choices. My hands tucked safely under my pillow, finally free from dreams I couldn't control. The next morning brought sunshine and coffee and a text from David asking if I wanted to go hiking. I stretched my fingers, feeling the familiar morning stiffness, but also the strength that had developed from learning to use them differently. I texted back, "Yes, I'd like that." Some stories don't end with reconciliation or family healing. Some stories end with walking away and building something better, with choosing your own peace over other people's comfort, with finally understanding that love doesn't require you to accept abuse, and family doesn't require you to sacrifice your truth for their narrative. My fingers will always carry the evidence of what was done to me, but they also carry the evidence of what I did for myself, and that makes all the difference. Dr. Martinez scheduled a follow-up appointment for the next week to discuss treatment options, but I knew the conversation would extend far beyond physical therapy and pain management. Armed with medical validation, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: certainty. The X-rays didn't lie. The fracture patterns were undeniable. My memories weren't distorted by oversensitivity or childhood imagination. I spent the weekend researching everything I could find about sibling abuse, medical documentation of deliberate trauma, and legal options for adult survivors. The statistics were sobering. Sibling abuse was the most common form of family violence, yet it remained largely hidden and unaddressed. Most cases went unreported because parents dismissed the behavior as normal rivalry, and victims learned to normalize their own victimization. The legal landscape was complicated. Criminal charges for childhood abuse were difficult to pursue decades later, especially without contemporaneous reports or witnesses willing to testify. But civil remedies existed in cases where long-term medical consequences could be documented and linked to specific perpetrators. I wasn't sure I wanted to pursue legal action, but I needed to understand my options. More importantly, I needed to prepare for the conversations that were coming, because I wasn't going to carry this knowledge alone anymore. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made my damaged joints ache. I called in sick to work and spent the day drafting a letter to my parents. Email felt too casual for what I needed to communicate, but I also wanted documentation of exactly what I told them and when. The letter took me 6 hours to write. I outlined the medical findings, included copies of Dr. Martinez's report, and explained what the evidence revealed about my childhood injuries. I kept the tone factual and clinical, avoiding emotional language that could be dismissed as dramatic overreaction. Quote, "The pattern of fractures in my left hand shows systematic, deliberate trauma over a period of several years during childhood. This is not speculation or interpretation. It is medical fact supported by radiographic evidence and confirmed by a board-certified hand specialist." Unquote. I mailed the letter on Tuesday with delivery confirmation,
and then waited for the phone to ring. It took 3 days. "Vera, honey, we got your letter." Mom's voice was strained, careful. "We're very concerned about you." Concerned about me or concerned about what the letter says? Both. This doctor has filled your head with some very troubling ideas. She's filled my head with medical facts. Medical facts that you're interpreting in a very specific way. I sat down at my kitchen table, looking out the window at neighbors walking their dogs and children riding bicycles. Normal families, living normal lives, where sisters didn't break each other's bones. How else would you interpret evidence of systematic, deliberate trauma? "Vera, sweetheart, you know how you've always been. You see patterns where there aren't any. You read intention into accidents." The familiar refrain made my stomach clench, but this time I had armor against it. "The medical specialist disagrees with your assessment of my perceptual abilities." One doctor's opinion. A board-certified hand specialist with 20 years of experience in trauma cases, who's only seen X-rays and heard your version of events. X-rays don't lie, Mom. No, but they don't tell the whole story either. I closed my eyes, feeling 8 years old again. What story do they tell? They tell the story of a child who had some unfortunate accidents during normal play with her sister. 7 fractures over 6 years is not normal play. It is when one child is significantly smaller and more fragile than the other. More fragile how? You know how you were, honey. Sensitive about everything, quick to cry. Maybe your bones were more delicate, too. It was a new variation on the old theme. Not only had I been too emotional to accurately perceive what was happening to me, but I had been physically defective in ways that made normal sibling interaction dangerous. Did any doctor ever diagnose me with bone density problems or connective tissue disorders? We never had you tested for those things. Because you never thought they were necessary? Or because you never considered that the injuries might not be accidental? Because we trusted that children who played too roughly would learn to be more careful after getting hurt a few times. Except the injuries kept happening. Children learn at different rates. So this was a learning problem. I was too stupid to avoid getting hurt. Don't put my words in your mouth. Then help me understand what you're actually saying. There was a long pause, filled with the kind of silence that had characterized my childhood whenever I asked uncomfortable questions. What I'm saying is that families are complicated.
Children play in ways that sometimes result in injuries. That doesn't mean anyone was deliberately trying to cause harm. Even when the injuries follow a specific pattern that indicates deliberate force applied at consistent angles. Even when one person interprets medical evidence through the lens of old resentments and childhood misunderstandings. I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. I let it go to voicemail. "Vera, please don't hang up on me. We love you and we want to work through this together. But you have to be willing to consider that your interpretation might not be the only possible explanation." I deleted the message without listening to the rest. That evening, Meredith called from her cell phone. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won over self-protection. "Vera, Mom told me about your letter." "I'm sure she did." "I think we need to talk. Just the two of us." "We are talking. I mean, in person. Can I come over?" The thought of Meredith in my apartment, in the space I had carefully constructed to feel safe, made my skin crawl. "No." "Then can we meet somewhere? Coffee shop, restaurant?" "Why?" "Because you're my sister and I love you. Because this misunderstanding is tearing our family apart." "It's not a misunderstanding, Meredith." "It is, though. And I think if we sit down together, I can help you see that." There was something in her tone that reminded me of the afternoon with the tea, when she had bent my finger backward while explaining how my sensitivity distorted my perceptions. The same patient condescension, the same certainty that she could correct my faulty thinking through proper instruction. I don't need you to help me see anything. But you do, Vera. You always have. Remember how you used to get confused about what really happened when we were kids? How you'd build up these elaborate stories about people being mean to you? I remember telling the truth and being told I was lying. You remember being young and scared and trying to make sense of things that felt overwhelming. I remember you breaking my fingers. You remember being hurt and needing someone to blame. The conversation was following the same circular pattern as every discussion we'd ever had about the injuries. No matter what evidence I presented, Meredith had explanations that transformed deliberate abuse into accidental contact and reasonable concern. The medical evidence supports my memories. The medical evidence supports the fact that you broke your fingers multiple times. It doesn't support your interpretation of how or why. Dr. Martinez said the fracture patterns are consistent with deliberate hyperextension trauma. Dr. Martinez said what doctors always say when they're looking for abuse patterns. They see what they're trained to look for. She's a hand specialist, not a psychiatrist. She's a person with preconceived notions about sibling relationships and childhood trauma. I found myself getting drawn into the debate, despite knowing it was pointless. Meredith had spent 20 years perfecting her version of events, smoothing away any rough edges that might suggest deliberate cruelty. Why would I make this up? You're not making it up. You're misremembering it. Based on what? Based on your tendency to interpret normal interactions as personal attacks. Says who? Says everyone who's ever known you, Vera. Teachers, coaches, family friends, they all noticed how sensitive you were, how quick to assume malice. It was possible that was true. It was possible that my childhood reputation for oversensitivity had been well established among adults who watched me navigate social situations. But it was also possible that my reputation had been shaped by a family narrative that required me to be the problem child in order to protect the golden daughter. Even if I was sensitive, that doesn't mean the injuries were accidental. It means you were more likely to interpret accidental injuries as deliberate attacks. Or it means I was more attuned to subtle forms of cruelty that adults couldn't see. Which is more likely, Vera, that a 12-year-old girl was sophisticated enough to commit systematic abuse while making it look accidental to every adult around her, or that a sensitive 8-year-old misunderstood what was happening to her? When she put it that way, my version did sound implausible, a conspiracy of deliberate violence hidden in plain sight, perpetrated by a child and covered up by parents who genuinely believed they were protecting both daughters. The X-rays didn't care about plausibility. They showed what they showed. I have medical evidence. You have medical evidence of broken bones. Everything else is interpretation and assumption. The interpretation comes from a medical specialist with expertise in trauma patterns. The interpretation comes from a person you told about our family conflicts before she examined your X-rays. I didn't tell her about family conflicts. I told her about systematic abuse, which influenced how she read the radiographic evidence. We were going in circles, each exchange reinforcing our respective positions without creating any possibility for resolution. Meredith would never acknowledge that she had hurt me deliberately, and I would never again accept responsibility for my own victimization. I don't think this conversation is productive. It could be if you were willing to consider alternative explanations. I've spent 20 years considering alternative explanations. Now I have medical confirmation of what I always knew. You have medical confirmation of what you wanted to believe. I wanted to believe my sister loved me and would never hurt me on purpose. I do love you. That's why I'm trying to help you understand what really happened. What really happened is that you systematically broke my fingers over a period of years, and our parents helped you cover it up by dismissing my reports as oversensitivity.
What really happened is that we played together as children. Sometimes things got rough, and you've spent 20 years turning normal sibling interactions into a trauma narrative. Normal sibling interactions don't result in multiple documented fractures. They do when one sibling is significantly larger and stronger than the other, and the smaller sibling doesn't understand the need for self-protection. Self-protection from my sister? Self-protection during normal rough play? By staying away from you entirely? By being more aware of your physical limitations and not putting yourself in situations where you could get hurt. There it was again, the subtle shift of responsibility from perpetrator to victim. Not Meredith should have been more careful with her smaller sister, but Vera should have been more careful around her larger sister. I was 8 years old. 8-year-olds are capable of learning from experience. The experience of being hurt by someone who was supposed to protect me. The experience of recognizing when play was getting too rough and removing yourself from the situation. I shouldn't have had to protect myself from you. You shouldn't have had to learn basic self-preservation skills? The conversation had devolved into philosophical differences about childhood responsibility and family dynamics. Meredith genuinely believed that 8-year-old me bore significant responsibility for my repeated injuries, while I believed that 12-year-old her bore responsibility for controlling her own behavior. I think we're done here. Vera, please don't hang up on me. I'm trying to help you.
You think I'm mentally ill. I think you're struggling with some difficult emotions and using this doctor's report to validate feelings that might not be based in reality. The feelings are based in broken bones. The feelings are based in childhood memories that have been influenced by years of resentment and misunderstanding. I'm hanging up now. Vera, wait, I love you. We all love you, but this path you're going down isn't healthy for anyone. What path is that? Blaming other people for problems that might be better addressed through therapy and personal growth. I ended the call and immediately blocked her number. The next morning, I called Dr. Martinez's office and asked to schedule another appointment. I'd like to get a second opinion on my x-rays, I told the receptionist, from another hand specialist who hasn't heard any history about how the injuries occurred. Of course, Dr. Martinez can provide you with referrals to other specialists in the area. I want someone who will look at the radiographic evidence without any background information about my family situation. I'll make a note of that for Dr. Martinez. The appointment was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, I received a series of text messages from various family members, each expressing concern about my recent struggles and offering support for whatever I was going through. Aunt Winda, your mom mentioned you've been having some health issues, thinking of you and hoping you're getting the help you need. Uncle Dennis, heard you're dealing with some difficult stuff. Remember that family is always here for you, no matter what. Cousin Rebecca, Mom said you might be having a rough time. Call me if you want to talk. Love you. The messages followed a clear pattern. I was the one having problems, struggling with health issues, dealing with difficult stuff. The family narrative had already shifted to position me as the troubled member who needed help and support, rather than the victim seeking acknowledgement and accountability. I didn't respond to any of the messages. Dr. Martinez reviewed my request during our appointment and provided referrals to 3 other hand specialists in the region. She also gave me copies of my x-rays and a detailed report that described the fracture patterns without any reference to family dynamics or abuse allegations. I think getting a second opinion is wise, she said, not because I doubt my assessment, but because having multiple expert confirmations will be helpful if you decide to pursue any kind of formal action. What kind of formal action? Legal consultation, documentation for therapy, medical records for insurance purposes if you need ongoing treatment. Do you think I should pursue legal action? That's not a medical decision, Vera. That's a personal one. But I can tell you that the injuries you sustained will likely require ongoing medical management as you age. The early arthritis we're seeing is directly related to those childhood fractures. So this will get worse. Gradually, yes, the irregular healing created surfaces that don't articulate properly. Over time, that leads to increased wear and inflammation. How much worse? That depends on a lot of factors.
activity level, genetics, overall health, but you're looking at decades of progressive joint deterioration. I stared at my hands, those familiar fingers that would continue to betray me for the rest of my life, not just through pain and stiffness, but through the daily reminder of what had been done to me and dismissed as accidents. Is there anything that can help? Physical therapy to maintain mobility, anti-inflammatory medications to manage pain and swelling, occupational therapy to learn joint protection techniques. Eventually, surgical interventions might be necessary. Surgery? Joint fusion or replacement if the arthritis becomes severe enough. We're talking many years down the road, but it's a possibility you should be aware of. I left the appointment with a folder full of referrals and educational materials about post-traumatic arthritis. The medical consequences of my childhood abuse would follow me for decades, requiring ongoing treatment and adaptation. But I also left with something more valuable: absolute certainty about what had happened to me and been taught to doubt. Dr. Martinez had no reason to lie or embellish. She had no investment in family drama or personal grievances. She simply looked at X-rays and reported what she saw. The second opinion appointment was scheduled with Dr. Robert Chen, a hand surgeon affiliated with the University Medical Center. I requested that the referral include only my radiographic images and a basic description of my current symptoms, with no background information about the circumstances of the original injuries. Dr. Chen's office was larger and more formal than Dr. Martinez's, with diplomas from prestigious institutions and awards from professional organizations. He was probably in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of authoritative manner that suggested decades of experience with complex cases. "I understand you're looking for an independent assessment of some childhood injuries," he said, settling behind his desk with my x-rays arranged on the light box. "Yes, I'd like to know what you see in the fracture patterns." He studied the images for several minutes, occasionally pulling out a magnifying glass to examine specific areas. His expression remained neutral and professional throughout the review. "These are interesting findings," he said. "Multiple healed fractures in the metacarpals and phalanges, all showing similar patterns of trauma." "What kind of patterns?" "Hyperextension injuries with fractures at consistent angles and locations. The type of trauma we typically see when joints are forced beyond their normal range of motion." "Could these be accidental injuries?" "The individual fractures could be accidental, certainly. Children break fingers in playground accidents, sports injuries, that sort of thing." But the pattern is unusual. 7 fractures across 5 fingers, all showing the same mechanism of injury. If these were truly accidental, I would expect to see more variation in the fracture patterns. What would cause this type of consistency? Deliberate hyperextension, someone grabbing the fingers and bending them backward with enough force to cause fractures. "How confident are you in that assessment?" "Very confident. I've been evaluating hand trauma for 30 years. This pattern is distinctive." I felt something loosen in my chest, a tension I hadn't realized I was carrying. The second opinion confirmed what Dr. Martinez had told me. The fractures were not random accidents, but evidence of systematic abuse involving repeated hyperextension of the finger joints. Could there be other explanations? Theoretically, yes. Some genetic conditions can cause increased bone fragility. Certain neurological disorders can lead to repetitive self-injury, but those conditions would typically present with other symptoms and wouldn't explain the specific pattern we're seeing here. What about normal sibling roughness, one child being larger and stronger than the other? Normal sibling roughness doesn't typically result in multiple hyperextension fractures, and the force required to cause these injuries goes well beyond what we'd consider normal childhood play. So, in your professional opinion, these injuries were inflicted deliberately? In my professional opinion, these injuries are consistent with systematic physical abuse involving repeated hyperextension of the finger joints. I scheduled follow-up appointments with both specialists to discuss long-term treatment options, then drove home with 2 independent medical confirmations of what I had always known but been taught to doubt. That evening, I composed an email to my parents with copies of both medical reports attached. I have now received independent confirmation from 2 board-certified hand specialists that my childhood finger injuries show evidence of systematic deliberate trauma, not accidental contact during normal play. Both doctors reached this conclusion solely based on radiographic evidence without any input from me about family dynamics or interpersonal relationships. I continued. The medical facts are clear and undisputed. Meredith systematically broke my fingers over a period of years, and you helped cover it up by dismissing my reports as oversensitivity.
This is not interpretation or assumption. This is documented medical evidence confirmed by multiple specialists. I ended with, I am not interested in debating these findings or hearing alternative explanations. The evidence speaks for itself. What I need from you now is acknowledgement of what happened and accountability for your role in enabling it. I sent the email and went to bed, finally free from the nagging doubt that had plagued me for decades. Whatever happened next, I knew the truth. Medical science had vindicated my memories and validated my perceptions. The phone started ringing at 7 in the morning. I didn't answer. It rang again at 7:30, 8 o'clock, 8:30. Each call went to voicemail, each message expressing increasing levels of concern and frustration. Vera, honey, we need to talk about this email you sent. Vera, you're scaring us with these accusations. Vera, please call us back. We love you and want to work through this together. By noon, there were 12 missed calls and 8 voicemails. I deleted them all without listening. At 2 o'clock, someone knocked on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw my father standing in the hallway, looking older and more tired than I remembered. I didn't open the door. Vera, I know you're in there. Your car is in the parking lot. I stood silently behind the door, waiting for him to leave. We got your email. We need to talk about this face to face. No, we don't, I called through the door. Yes, we do. This is too important to handle through emails and voicemails. The medical evidence is clear. There's nothing to discuss. There's everything to discuss. You're talking about destroying our family based on some doctor's interpretation of old x-rays. I'm talking about acknowledging what happened to me. What happened to you was a series of childhood accidents that have been mischaracterized by medical professionals who weren't there. Medical professionals who specialize in trauma patterns and have no reason to lie. Medical professionals who are human beings capable of being wrong. I leaned against the door, feeling 8 years old again, even faced with independent confirmation from multiple specialists. My father was still insisting that my perceptions were flawed and my evidence was unreliable. 2 different doctors reached the same conclusion. 2 different doctors heard the same story and looked for the same patterns. They didn't hear any story. I specifically requested that the second doctor evaluate the x-rays without any background information. But they knew you were looking for evidence of abuse that influenced their interpretation. How would they know that? Because that's why people seek second opinions on old injuries. They're looking for medical validation of abuse allegations. It was possible he was right. It was possible that Dr. Chen had assumed I was seeking confirmation of abuse simply because I had requested an independent assessment of childhood fractures. But it was also possible that the fracture patterns were so distinctive that any competent specialist would reach the same conclusion. The evidence stands on its own merits. The evidence shows broken bones. Everything else is interpretation. Interpretation by medical experts with decades of experience. Interpretation by human beings with unconscious biases and preconceived notions. What about my conscious memories of what happened? What about your unconscious tendency to misinterpret normal interactions as personal attacks? We were having the same conversation we'd been having for 20 years, just with higher stakes and more documentation. No amount of medical evidence would convince my father that his golden daughter had systematically abused his other daughter.
The alternative would require him to acknowledge that he had failed to protect me when I told him what was happening. I'm not going to keep having this conversation, I said through the door. Then let me in so we can have a different conversation. About what? About finding a way forward that doesn't destroy our family. Our family was destroyed the first time you told me that Meredith breaking my finger was an accident. Vera, please, we're not perfect parents, but we love you. We've always loved you. Love doesn't dismiss a child's reports of being hurt. Love tries to help a child understand the difference between accidents and attacks, even when the medical evidence shows there was no difference, especially when the medical evidence is inconclusive. Two specialists calling it systematic abuse isn't inconclusive. Two specialists offering one possible interpretation of ambiguous data. I walked away from the door and sat on my couch, letting my father's voice fade into background noise. He continued talking for another 10 minutes, alternating between pleas for reconciliation and explanations of why the medical evidence wasn't as definitive as I believed. Eventually, he gave up and left, but I knew he would be back. This conversation wasn't over, and my family wasn't going to accept my version of events without a fight. That evening, Meredith somehow got my new phone number and called from an unknown line. Vera, Dad told me about your email and the additional medical reports. Then you know what they say. I know what you think they say. I know what two medical specialists say they say. Two medical specialists who are giving you the answer you wanted to hear. Or two medical specialists who are telling the truth. The truth is that we were children playing together and sometimes accidents happened. 7 fractures isn't sometimes. 7 fractures over 6 years with an active, athletic older sister and a smaller, more fragile younger sister. More fragile how? You know how you were, Vera. Delicate, sensitive, quick to cry when you got hurt. Quick to cry when you hurt me. Quick to cry when normal childhood activities resulted in minor injuries that most kids would shake off. Broken bones aren't minor injuries. They are when they happen during normal play and heal without complications. My bones didn't heal without complications. They healed crooked, and now I have early arthritis. You have some joint stiffness that might or might not be related to old injuries. I have post-traumatic arthritis directly caused by the irregular healing of fractures you inflicted. You have some aches and pains that you're attributing to childhood accidents because it gives you someone to blame for adult problems. We were having the same conversation we'd been having for 20 years, just with higher stakes and more documentation. No amount of medical evidence would convince my father that his golden daughter had systematically abused his other daughter. The alternative would require him to acknowledge that he had failed to protect me when I told him what was happening. I'm not going to keep having this conversation, I said through the door. Then let me in so we can have a different conversation. About what? About finding a way forward that doesn't destroy our family. Our family was destroyed the first time you told me that Meredith breaking my finger was an accident. Vera, please, we're not perfect parents, but we love you. We've always loved you. Love doesn't dismiss a child's reports of being hurt. Love tries to help a child understand the difference between accidents and attacks, even when the medical evidence shows there was no difference, especially when the medical evidence is inconclusive. Two specialists calling it systematic abuse isn't inconclusive. Two specialists offering one possible interpretation of ambiguous data. Which is more likely, Vera? That medical science can definitively determine intent from bone scans, or that you found doctors willing to validate your pre-existing beliefs? It wasn't possible he was right. It was possible that Dr. Chen had assumed I was seeking confirmation of abuse simply because I had requested an independent assessment of childhood fractures. But it was also possible that the fracture patterns were so distinctive that any competent specialist would reach the same conclusion.
Could X-rays distinguish between deliberate abuse and repeated accidents involving an oversized sister and an undersized victim? But then I remembered the look in Meredith's eyes before she grabbed my wrist at the barbecue, the calculated way she had positioned herself between me and Dad after the remote control incident, the systematic nature of the injuries, always to my left hand, always hyperextension fractures, always followed by explanations about accidents and oversensitivity. I know what you did to me. You think you know what I did to you. I have medical confirmation. You have medical opinions that support your interpretation of childhood memories. I have evidence. You have confirmation bias disguised as medical expertise. I hung up and immediately blocked the unknown number she had called from. The next week brought a different kind of pressure. Family members began reaching out with increasing frequency, each expressing concern about my, quote, recent behavior and offering various forms of help and intervention. Aunt Linda called to suggest family counseling. Sometimes these old hurts can be worked through with professional guidance. Uncle Dennis texted about the importance of forgiveness. Holding on to resentment only hurts you in the end. Cousin Rebecca offered to mediate. Maybe if we all sat down together, we could find a way to move forward. Even my grandmother called, her voice thin and shaky over the phone. Sweetheart, family is the most important thing we have. Don't let pride destroy something precious. Each conversation followed the same pattern. The injuries were acknowledged as unfortunate accidents, my interpretation was framed as misguided resentment, and reconciliation was presented as the healthy, mature response. No one questioned whether the medical evidence might be accurate. No one considered that my version of events might be true. The family had closed ranks around their preferred narrative, and I was being positioned as the unstable outsider who threatened their unity with false accusations and unreasonable demands. But I wasn't alone anymore. I had medical validation from 2 independent specialists. I had documentation that couldn't be gaslit or dismissed as oversensitivity. For the first time in my life, the truth was stronger than their collective denial. 3 weeks after sending the email with the medical reports, I received a certified letter from a law firm representing my parents and sister. The letter was brief and formal, written in the careful language of legal professionals. Our clients have been made aware of certain allegations you have made regarding events from your childhood. These allegations are false and defamatory. They have caused significant emotional distress to our clients and threaten to damage their reputations in the community. The letter continued. If you continue to make these false statements, either privately or publicly, our clients will be forced to pursue legal remedies to protect their interests. We strongly advise you to cease all communication regarding these matters and to refrain from discussing them with third parties. I read the letter 3 times, feeling a mixture of rage and dark satisfaction. They were threatening to sue me for telling the truth about my own abuse. But they were also revealing how seriously they took the medical evidence. If my allegations were truly baseless, they wouldn't need lawyers to silence me. I made copies of the letter and added it to my growing file of documentation. Then I called Dr. Martinez's office and asked for additional copies of all my medical records related to the finger fractures. I may need these for legal purposes, I told the receptionist. Of course, we'll have those ready for you by the end of the week. I also started researching attorneys who specialized in childhood abuse cases, not because I necessarily wanted to sue my family, but because I needed to understand my rights and options if they continued to escalate their legal threats. The attorney I consulted was a woman in her 40s named Sarah Hendricks, who had built her practice around representing adult survivors of childhood abuse. Her office was warm and comfortable, designed to help traumatized clients feel safe while discussing difficult topics. "Tell me about your situation," she said, settling into her chair with a notepad. I outlined the medical evidence, the family denial, and the recent legal threats. Sarah listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just taking notes. "This is an interesting case," she said when I finished. "The medical documentation is compelling, especially having independent confirmation from 2 specialists. Is it enough to pursue legal action?"
Potentially, yes. The challenge with childhood abuse cases is usually lack of evidence or witnesses, but medical documentation of systematic trauma is powerful evidence. What kind of legal action would be possible? Civil suits for damages related to the ongoing medical consequences of the abuse. Criminal charges would be more difficult because of the statute of limitations, but civil remedies have longer windows. What kind of damages? Medical expenses, both past and future, pain and suffering, lost wages if the condition affects your ability to work, emotional distress. And the legal threats from their attorney? Empty posturing, most likely. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation claims. If you can prove your allegations are accurate, they can't successfully sue you for making them. Even if the proof is medical interpretation rather than direct evidence, medical expert testimony is considered strong evidence in civil cases. If two board-certified specialists are willing to testify that your injuries show patterns consistent with systematic abuse, that carries significant weight. I left the consultation with a better understanding of my options, but no immediate decision about how to proceed. The legal route felt like it would consume years of my life and emotional energy, even if it ultimately vindicated my claims. More importantly, I wasn't sure what I actually wanted from my family. Acknowledgement? Apology? Financial compensation for medical expenses? Or just the freedom to tell my story without legal threats and family pressure? The answer came to me gradually over the following weeks as I continued to receive calls and messages from relatives urging reconciliation and forgiveness. They weren't interested in truth or accountability. They were interested in maintaining the family mythology that required my silence and complicity. I realized that what I wanted most was something they could never give me. A childhood where my reports of abuse were believed and addressed rather than dismissed and covered up. Since that was impossible, the next best thing was a future where I didn't have to pretend their version of events was true. 2 months after receiving the legal threat, I sent my own letter to the family attorney. Your clients have threatened legal action against me for discussing my own medical history and childhood experiences. Please be advised that I have documentation from 2 board-certified medical specialists confirming that my childhood finger injuries show patterns consistent with systematic physical abuse. I continued, I am prepared to defend the truth of my statements in court if necessary. Your client's threats will not prevent me from seeking appropriate medical treatment for the ongoing consequences of childhood trauma, nor will they prevent me from discussing my experiences with medical professionals, therapists, or other appropriate parties. I ended with, if your clients wish to avoid public scrutiny of these matters, I suggest they reconsider their approach to addressing them privately. I never heard back from the attorney, but I also stopped hearing from my family. The phone calls tapered off, the text messages became less frequent, and eventually the pressure campaign ended entirely. They had realized that their usual tactics wouldn't work this time because I had something I'd never possessed before. Unshakable proof that my version of events was accurate. The silence that followed wasn't the weaponized silence of my childhood, designed to punish me for speaking uncomfortable truths. It was the silence of people who had finally run of explanations and excuses. And for the first time in my life, that silence felt like peace. The silence lasted 6 months. 6 months of no phone calls, no text messages, no surprise visits or certified letters. 6 months of living without the constant undercurrent of family drama and manipulation. I began to understand what normal people meant when they talked about peace of mind. My apartment felt different without the threat of intrusion. I rearranged the furniture, bought plants that required consistent care, and started cooking elaborate meals that I ate slowly while reading books about topics that interested me. Simple pleasures that felt impossible when every day brought new attempts to undermine my reality. The physical therapy for my hands was progressing well. Dr. Martinez had referred me to an occupational therapist named Janet, who specialized in helping people adapt to chronic conditions. She taught me exercises to maintain flexibility, showed me how to modify daily activities to reduce joint stress, and helped me accept that my hands would never be completely normal. Acceptance doesn't mean giving up, Janet said during one of our sessions. It means working with what you have instead of fighting against what you've lost. The concept applied to more than just my physical condition. I was learning to accept that my family would never acknowledge what had happened to me, and that was actually liberating rather than defeating. I didn't need their validation anymore because I had medical confirmation and my own unshakable certainty. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma and family estrangement. Dr. Lisa Wong was a soft-spoken woman in her 50s who had built her practice around helping adult survivors navigate complex family relationships. Her office was filled with books about healing and growth, and she had a way of listening that made me feel heard without being judged.
But protecting yourself from ongoing harm is always reasonable. Even if it means never seeing my nephews again, even then, you can't protect other people at the expense of your own healing. The question of my nephews haunted me more than any other aspect of the estrangement. Marcus and Tyler were innocent children who had become collateral damage in a conflict they couldn't understand. I worried about them constantly, wondering if Meredith's need to control and educate through pain extended to her own children. But Dr. Wong helped me understand that I couldn't save everyone, especially when doing so would require me to return to a toxic dynamic that had taken decades to escape. My responsibility was to heal myself and build a life based on truth rather than convenient fiction. Recovery isn't just about processing past trauma, she explained. It's about creating new patterns and relationships that support your well-being. I started building those new patterns slowly and deliberately. I joined a book club at the local library where discussions focused on literature rather than family drama. I volunteered at a community garden where the only healing required was tending to plants and soil. I took a pottery class where my damaged hands learned to create beautiful things instead of just enduring pain. The pottery class was particularly meaningful. The instructor, an elderly man named Robert, noticed that I favored my right hand and asked if I had mobility issues with my left. "Old injuries," I said, showing him how my fingers didn't straighten completely. "Ah," he said, examining my hand with the same attention Dr. Martinez had given my x-rays. "We can work with that. Clay responds to whatever hands bring to it." He taught me techniques that accommodated my limited range of motion, showing me how to use my whole body instead of just my fingers to shape the clay. Within a few weeks, I was creating bowls and mugs that bore the subtle asymmetry of hands that had been broken and healed imperfectly. "Your pieces have character," Robert said, examining a vase I had finished glazing. "You can see the story in the clay." I liked the idea that my story was visible in my work, that the evidence of what I had survived could be transformed into something beautiful rather than just something painful. 8 months after the last family contact, I received an unexpected phone call at work. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, the voice was familiar. "Vera, this is Mrs. Henderson from down the street from your parents' house." Mrs. Henderson had been our neighbor throughout my childhood, the kind of woman who knew everyone's business and felt entitled to comment on it. I hadn't spoken to her in over a decade. "Oh, hello, Mrs. Henderson. How are you?" "I'm fine, dear, but I'm calling because I'm worried about your family." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "Well, your parents seem very upset lately. Your mother has been crying in the garden, and your father looks like he's aged 10 years. They told me you've been having some kind of disagreement." "It's more than a disagreement. Whatever it is, I think you should consider making peace. Family is so important, and your parents are getting older." The familiar pressure to prioritize family harmony over personal truth made my chest ache with old frustration. But this time, I had the strength to respond differently. "Mrs. Henderson, I appreciate your concern, but this situation is more complicated than it might appear."
All family situations are complicated, dear, but love conquers everything if you're willing to forgive. Some things don't deserve forgiveness. Oh, sweetheart, that's not true. There's nothing that can't be worked out between people who love each other. I almost laughed at the innocent certainty in her voice. Mrs. Henderson lived in a world where family problems were just misunderstandings that could be resolved through better communication and mutual goodwill. She had no framework for understanding systematic abuse or the complex dynamics that enabled it. I'm not interested in working things out, I said gently, but thank you for calling. But Vera, your sister is suffering too. Meredith came to see me last week and she was beside herself with worry about you. The mention of Meredith made my hands clench involuntarily. What did she say? She said you've been struggling with some mental health issues and have started blaming your family for things that weren't anyone's fault. She's heartbroken that you won't accept help. There it was again, the narrative that positioned me as the unstable family member who needed help rather than the victim seeking acknowledgement. Even months after our last contact, Meredith was still managing the story, still controlling how our conflict was perceived by outsiders. Mrs. Henderson, I'm not struggling with mental health issues. I'm dealing with the long-term consequences of childhood abuse that my family refuses to acknowledge. Oh dear, I'm sure that's not true. Your parents are such good people, and Meredith has always been such a sweet girl. People can appear sweet while doing terrible things to their siblings. But surely you don't mean that literally. Sometimes children play rough and accidents happen. 7 broken fingers over 6 years aren't accidents. There was a long pause. 7 broken fingers? All deliberately inflicted by my sister? All dismissed by my parents as normal sibling roughness? Well, I don't know what to say. There's nothing to say. But now you understand why I'm not interested in reconciliation. Mrs. Henderson ended the call shortly after that, clearly uncomfortable with information that didn't fit her understanding of our family dynamics. But her reaction gave me hope that other people might be capable of hearing the truth if it was presented clearly and calmly. 2 weeks later, I received another unexpected contact. This time, it was an email from my cousin Rebecca, Aunt Linda's daughter, who had been part of the pressure campaign months earlier. Vera, I've been thinking about our last conversation and some things you said about your childhood. I was wondering if we could talk privately. There are some things I remember that might be relevant. I stared at the email for a long time, trying to decide whether Rebecca was genuinely questioning the family narrative or if this was another attempt to draw me back into discussions that would inevitably center around my need to forgive and forget. But curiosity won out. I replied with my phone number and suggested she call that evening. Rebecca's voice was tentative when she called, like she was testing the safety of each word before speaking it. Vera? I want you to know that I've been thinking about what you said regarding Meredith and the finger injuries. What about them? I remember some things from when we were kids that I never really thought about before. What kind of things? Like how you always seemed scared of Meredith and how you would avoid being alone with her during family gatherings. I felt a flicker of hope that someone had finally noticed the patterns that adults had missed or ignored. You remember that? I remember thinking it was weird that you never wanted to play the games Meredith suggested. You would always try to stay near the adults or find excuses to go inside. What else do you remember? The way Meredith would get this look on her face when she was angry? Not normal kid angry, but something colder, more calculating. Did you ever see her hurt me? Not directly, but I remember one Christmas when you came out of the bathroom crying and holding your hand. Meredith was right behind you, acting all concerned and helpful. Do you remember what she said?
She said you had slipped and caught your hand on the towel rack, but I thought it was strange because the bathroom was carpeted and you weren't wet. It was a small memory, probably insignificant to Rebecca at the time, but it confirmed what I had always known about Meredith's ability to craft plausible explanations for suspicious injuries. Why are you telling me this now? Because after you cut contact, I started noticing how differently family members talked about the situation. Everyone was so focused on your mental health and your tendency to hold grudges, but no one wanted to discuss what might have actually happened. What made you question their version? My therapist. I've been seeing someone to work through some issues with my own childhood, and when I mentioned the family drama, she asked some questions that made me think differently about the whole situation. What kind of questions? Like why the family was so invested in you being wrong instead of being curious about why you felt hurt, and why everyone was so quick to diagnose you with mental health problems instead of considering that your memories might be accurate. I felt tears building behind my eyes. Rebecca was the first family member to question the official narrative, the first person to consider that my version of events might be true. Do you believe me now? I believe that something happened to you that the family doesn't want to acknowledge. I don't have all the details, but I remember enough to know that your relationship with Meredith was never normal. Even if you believe me, it doesn't change anything. The rest of the family has made their choice. It changes things for me, and maybe for a few other people who have been afraid to speak up. What do you mean? I've been talking to my brother David. He's 2 years younger than us, so he didn't witness as much, but he remembers some things too. Like what? Like how Meredith always had to be in control of everything, how she would manipulate situations to make herself look good and other people look bad, how she seemed to enjoy having power over smaller kids. Did he ever see her hurt anyone? Not physically, but he remembers her being cruel in other ways. Emotional manipulation, making people feel stupid or ugly or worthless. It was a broader pattern than just the physical abuse I had endured. Meredith's need to dominate and control had extended to other family members, but they had been easier to manage because they hadn't challenged her authority the way my reports of deliberate injury had. Has David said anything to his parents? Not yet. We wanted to talk to you first and understand what really happened. What really happened is that Meredith systematically broke my fingers for years while everyone dismissed it as accidents. I have medical documentation that proves it. Medical documentation? I told Rebecca about Dr. Martinez and Dr. Chen, about the fracture patterns and the independent confirmations of systematic abuse. Her silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had been disconnected. Rebecca, are you still there? I'm here. I'm just processing. You have actual medical proof? I have radiographic evidence that confirms what I always knew but was taught to doubt. Jesus, Vera, I'm so sorry. You don't need to apologize. You were a kid too. But I could have said something. I could have told an adult that something seemed wrong. The adults already knew something was wrong. They chose not to see it. What can I do now? How can I help? The question caught me off guard. I had become so accustomed to family members demanding that I change my behavior or perspective that Rebecca's offer of support felt foreign. I don't know. I'm not trying to tear the family apart or get revenge. I just want to live my life without having to pretend that my abuse was normal sibling rivalry. Do you want me to talk to other family members? Tell them what I remember? Only if you want to, but don't expect it to change anything. People believe what they need to believe to maintain their version of reality. Maybe, but maybe some of them are ready to hear the truth. Rebecca and I talked for another hour, sharing memories and perspectives that painted a different picture of our childhood family dynamics. She promised to have a conversation with David and to consider whether approaching other relatives might be worthwhile. Whatever happens, she said as we were ending the call, I want you to know that I believe you, and I'm proud of you for protecting yourself, even when it meant walking away from all of us. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope that truth might actually matter to someone in my family. It was a small hope, tempered by decades of disappointment, but it was real. A month later, Rebecca called again with an update. She and David had spoken to their parents about their childhood memories of Meredith's behavior. The conversation hadn't gone well. They accused us of betraying family loyalty, Rebecca said. Mom said we were letting you poison our minds with false memories. I'm sorry, I didn't want to cause problems for you. You didn't cause problems. You exposed problems that were already there. What did David say? He was more direct than I was. He told them that he remembered Meredith being cruel and controlling, and that it wasn't surprising that her behavior had escalated to physical abuse. How did they respond? They said he was being influenced by his own issues with authority figures. Apparently, his struggles with our father during his teenage years make his memories unreliable. It was the same pattern I had encountered with my own parents. Any challenge to the official narrative was dismissed as evidence of the challenger's mental instability or personal bias. Are you okay with how it went? I'm okay with telling the truth, even if they don't want to hear it. David feels the same way. And the rest of the family? Mixed reactions. Some people are asking questions. Others are circling the wagons around Meredith and your parents. Questions about what? About why you would make up something so specific. About why you would cut contact with your whole family over childhood accidents. About whether there might be more to the story than we've been told. Do you think any of them will reach out to me? I don't know, but the conversation has started, and that's something. Rebecca was right. The conversation had started, and it was spreading through the family network in ways I couldn't control or predict. Some relatives were questioning the official narrative for the first time, while others were doubling down on their loyalty to Meredith and my parents. But the truth was out there now, supported by medical evidence and corroborated by witnesses who had been too young or too intimidated to speak up before. Whatever happened next, the family mythology was cracking in ways that couldn't be easily repaired. 3 months later, I received an unexpected visit at work. The receptionist called to tell me that my father was in the lobby asking to speak with me. My first instinct was to refuse the meeting. We had said everything that needed to be said, and I had no interest in rehashing old arguments. But curiosity about what had prompted this visit after nearly a year of silence made me agree to see him. Dad looked older than I remembered, gray around the temples and tired in a way that suggested poor sleep and constant worry. He sat in the small conference room I had borrowed for our conversation, turning his baseball cap in his hands like a prayer wheel. "Thank you for seeing me," he said quietly. "What do you want, Dad?" "I want to understand what really happened when you were a child." The words hit me like cold water. After a year of defending Meredith and dismissing my allegations, he was finally asking for my version of events. "What changed your mind?" "Rebecca and David have been talking to other family members. Some of them remember things that make me wonder if we missed something important." "Like what?" "Like how you always seemed afraid of Meredith, how you would hide when she was looking for you, how you never wanted to be alone with her." "You noticed that and didn't think it was significant?" "I thought it was normal sibling dynamics. Meredith was 4 years older and naturally dominant. You were more sensitive and naturally submissive." "Naturally submissive to abuse." "I didn't see it as abuse. I saw it as personality differences." 7 broken fingers is a personality difference? I saw 7 broken fingers as unfortunate accidents during normal play. Even though they all happened the same way? I didn't notice that they all happened the same way. Because you didn't want to notice. Dad was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands in a way that reminded me of myself during those long months of doubt and confusion. "Tell me what really happened," he said finally. So I did. I told him about the calculated way Meredith had positioned herself to control situations and narratives, about the look in her eyes before she hurt me, about the systematic nature of the abuse and the sophisticated gaslighting that followed each incident. I told him about the medical evidence, about Dr. Martinez and Dr. Chen, about the fracture patterns that confirmed what I had always known but been taught to doubt. Dad listened without interruption, occasionally wincing or shaking his head, but never arguing or explaining away my experiences. "The doctors really said it was deliberate?" he asked when I finished. 2 independent specialists confirmed that the fracture patterns are consistent with systematic physical abuse. "And you have their reports?" "I have their reports, their X-ray interpretations, and their willingness to testify if necessary." Jesus, Vera, what have we done? It was the first time in my life that my father had expressed doubt about the family's handling of my childhood injuries. The first time anyone had acknowledged that their version of events might be wrong. You protected the daughter you loved more at the expense of the daughter you loved less. We loved you both equally. No, you didn't, and that's why you couldn't see what was happening to me. What can I do now? How can I fix this? The question I had been waiting my entire life to hear. But now that it was finally asked, I realized I didn't have a simple answer. I don't know if it can be fixed, Dad. You can't give me back a childhood where my reports of abuse were believed and addressed. But we can acknowledge what happened. We can apologize for not protecting you. Can you? Because that would require admitting that Meredith is not the person you've spent decades believing her to be. If the medical evidence is as clear as you say it is, then maybe we need to reconsider everything we thought we knew about her. Are you willing to do that? I'm willing to look at the evidence and accept whatever conclusions it supports. It was more than I had ever hoped for from my father, but it was also probably too late to rebuild the relationship we might have had if he had been willing to look at evidence decades earlier. What about Mom? She's struggling with all of this. Rebecca and David's revelations have shaken her confidence in our family narrative. And Meredith? Meredith doesn't know that I'm here. She still maintains that all of this is based on misunderstandings and false memories. Does she know that other family members are questioning her version of events? She knows that some people are asking questions. It's making her defensive and angry. Angry enough to do what? I don't know. She's threatening to cut contact with anyone who doesn't support her completely. The irony wasn't lost on me. Meredith was using the same strategy I had used to protect myself, but for the opposite purpose. She was trying to maintain her false narrative by eliminating anyone who challenged it. What do you want from me, Dad? I want to understand how to move forward. I want to know if there's any possibility of rebuilding our relationship. That depends on what rebuilding means to you. It means acknowledging that we failed to protect you. It means accepting responsibility for enabling abuse that we should have recognized and stopped. And Meredith? Meredith is going to have to face the consequences of her actions, whatever those might be. It was the clearest statement of accountability I had ever heard from a family member. But words were easy, and I had learned not to trust promises that hadn't been tested by difficult circumstances. I need time to think about this, I told him. Of course, take all the time you need. And I need to see real changes in how the family handles this situation, not just private acknowledgments, but actual accountability. What would that look like? I don't know yet, but it would start with everyone admitting that the medical evidence is accurate and that my memories are reliable. Dad nodded slowly. I think I can make that happen, at least with some family members. What about the others? The others are going to have to decide whether they value truth more than comfort. We talked for another 30 minutes about practical matters and tentative possibilities, but I was careful not to commit to anything beyond continued conversation. Trust, once shattered, couldn't be rebuilt through a single meeting or even a series of meetings. It would require sustained evidence that the fundamental dynamics had actually changed. But for the first time in decades, change felt possible. Not inevitable, but possible. 6 months later, I received an invitation to a family gathering that I almost didn't open. The envelope was addressed in Rebecca's handwriting, and inside was a carefully worded invitation to a barbecue at her house. This is not a reconciliation event, the invitation read. This is an opportunity for family members who are committed to truth and accountability to gather together without pressure or agenda. A separate note explained that the guest list included only relatives who had acknowledged the accuracy of my childhood experiences and were supportive of my need for boundaries and healing. Meredith was not invited. Neither were my parents, though Dad had been told he could attend if he was prepared to publicly acknowledge what had happened to me. I stared at the invitation for weeks, trying to decide whether I was ready to test these new dynamics in a group setting. Dr. Wong encouraged me to trust my instincts about what felt safe and healing versus what felt obligatory or potentially harmful. You don't owe anyone your presence, she reminded me, not even family members who are finally telling the truth. But I was curious about this emerging faction of relatives who were willing to challenge the family mythology. And I was lonely for connections that didn't require me to hide my truth or apologize for my boundaries.
I RSVP'd yes, with the understanding that I could leave at any time if the gathering felt unsafe or counterproductive. The barbecue was smaller than I had expected. Rebecca and David were there with their respective partners. Uncle Dennis had surprised everyone by showing up after months of defending Meredith. 2 cousins I barely knew had driven in from out of state specifically to meet with me. "We wanted you to know that you're not alone," said my cousin Sarah, whom I hadn't seen since childhood.
Some of us remember things that support your story, and we're ashamed that it took us so long to speak up. The afternoon felt tentative and fragile, like we were all learning a new language of honesty that didn't come naturally after decades of practiced denial. But it also felt real in ways that family gatherings never had before. No one tried to minimize my experiences or suggest forgiveness strategies. No one questioned the medical evidence or offered alternative explanations for the fracture patterns. For the first time in my life, my truth was simply accepted as truth. "What's it been like?" David asked during a quiet moment when we were sitting together on Rebecca's back porch. "Living without all the family drama and pressure?" "Peaceful," I said, surprised by how easily the word came. "More peaceful than I ever imagined possible." "Do you miss any of it?" "I miss the idea of family, the fantasy of unconditional love and support. But I don't miss the reality we actually had." "What about Mom and Dad?" "I miss the parents I wish I had. I don't miss the parents who chose their golden child over their injured child." "Dad seems genuinely remorseful now." "Maybe, but remorse isn't the same as trustworthiness. And 30 years of enabling abuse isn't erased by a few months of delayed acknowledgement." David nodded thoughtfully. "What would it take for you to consider rebuilding those relationships?" "Sustained evidence that the fundamental dynamics have changed. Not just private apologies, but public accountability. Not just regret about the past, but active protection in the present." "What kind of protection?" "Standing up to Meredith when she tries to rewrite history. Supporting other potential victims if they come forward. Acknowledging the ongoing medical consequences of childhood abuse. That seems reasonable." "It seems reasonable to people who are committed to truth. It seems impossible to people who are committed to maintaining comfortable fiction." As the afternoon progressed, I found myself relaxing in ways I hadn't expected. These family members weren't trying to fix me or change me or convince me to forgive people who hadn't earned forgiveness. They were simply accepting me as I was, with my boundaries intact and my truth validated. When it was time to leave, Rebecca walked me to my car. "How was this for you?" she asked. "Better than I expected. Healing in ways I didn't know I needed." "Would you be open to doing it again sometime?" "Maybe, if it continues to feel genuine rather than performative." "It's genuine, Vera. We're all learning how to be family in a healthier way." "What about the others, the ones who weren't here today?" "Some of them are coming around slowly. Others are digging in deeper with Meredith and your parents." "And you're okay with that division?" "I'm okay with people facing consequences for the choices they make, including the choice to prioritize comfort over truth." I drove home feeling something I hadn't experienced in decades. Hope for meaningful family connections that didn't require me to sacrifice my integrity or deny my experiences. It wasn't the family I had been born into, but it was the family I was choosing to build, with people who valued truth over mythology. 1 year later, I hosted my own small gathering in my apartment. The guest list included Rebecca, David, and their partners, plus Dr. Wong and a few friends from my pottery class and book club. It was a celebration of my second adoptiversary, as I had started calling the anniversary of the day I received my medical validation. "It's been 2 years since I learned that my memories were accurate and my perceptions were reliable," I told the group, as we raised glasses of wine in my living room. 2 years since I stopped apologizing for my own victimization. "What's changed the most?" asked Janet, my occupational therapist who had become a friend. "Everything. But mostly, I've learned to trust myself in ways I never thought possible." "What do you mean?" "I mean that when someone tells me I'm being too sensitive or dramatic or difficult, I don't automatically assume they're right. I consider the possibility that they're wrong." "That seems like such a basic thing," said Rebecca. "It is basic.
But when you're raised to doubt your own perceptions from childhood, trusting yourself becomes a learned skill rather than a natural instinct. "What's next for you?" asked David. I looked around my apartment, at the pottery I had made with hands that bore the permanent evidence of childhood abuse, at the books I had chosen because they interested me rather than because they would please someone else, at the people who accepted my truth without requiring me to minimize it. Next, I keep building the life I want instead of the life other people think I should want. What does that look like? It looks like continued healing, professional growth, meaningful relationships with people who don't require me to pretend about my past. "Any thoughts about romantic relationships?" Rebecca asked with a grin. "I'm open to the possibility. For the first time in my life, I feel stable enough in my own identity to share it with someone else. That's huge progress." It is, but it's also just the beginning. Later that evening, after everyone had left and I was cleaning up wine glasses and dessert plates, I caught sight of my hands in the kitchen light. The fingers that had been broken and gaslit and dismissed. The joints that ache on rainy days and reminded me daily of what I had survived. But they were also the hands that had typed resignation letters from toxic jobs, signed leases on apartments where I felt safe, and created beautiful things from clay and creativity. They had learned to set boundaries and maintain them, to reach for support and accept it, to build a life based on truth rather than convenient fiction. My sister had tried to break more than my bones. She had tried to break my ability to trust my own perceptions, to advocate for myself, to believe that I deserved protection and care. For 20 years, she had succeeded. But bones heal, and sometimes they heal stronger than they were before the break. And sometimes people do too. I turned off the kitchen lights and went to bed in my own apartment, in my own chosen life, surrounded by my own carefully curated peace. My hands tucked safely under my pillow, finally free from dreams I couldn't control. The next morning brought sunshine and coffee and a text from a coworker asking if I wanted to grab lunch. Simple pleasures made possible by the absence of family drama and manipulation. I stretched my fingers, feeling the familiar morning stiffness, but also the strength that had developed from learning to use them differently. Then I texted back, "Yes, I'd like that." Some stories don't end with reconciliation or family healing. Some stories end with walking away and building something better, with choosing your own peace over other people's comfort, with finally understanding that love doesn't require you to accept abuse, and family doesn't require you to sacrifice your truth for their narrative. My fingers will always carry the evidence of what was done to me, but they also carry the evidence of what I did for myself. And that makes all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.